A 5-year-old girl stood frozen in a roaring train station, clutching a red suitcase and refusing to move. She wasn't lost, she was waiting. When a billionaire stopped to listen, one fragile promise shattered his world and forced him to choose between power and staying forever. Grand Union Station roared like a living thing. Wheels screamed against tile, announcements echoed off stone arches, snow melted into gray slush beneath thousands of hurried shoes. The city moved fast tonight, people chasing warmth homes, reasons to leave. At the center of it all stood something impossibly still. A little girl, 5 years old. She wore a faded red coat, 2 sizes too thin, a white dress peeking out beneath it, already damp from the cold. Her brown curls clung to her cheeks, darkened by melting snow. In her small hands, she clutched a battered red suitcase, its corners cracked, its handle taped together like someone had tried to keep it alive. She didn't cry. She didn't ask for help. She didn't move. People flowed around her like water around a rock. A woman glanced down, hesitated, then looked away. A man nearly collided with her suitcase, muttered an apology without stopping. No one asked why a child was standing alone in the middle of a winter station at night. Ilara Quinn stood perfectly straight, her feet planted, her eyes fixed on the large clock hanging above the platform. Every tick mattered. She had memorized the place, the bench near the pillar, the vending machine with the broken light, the exact line where the tile changed color. This was where her mother had knelt in front of her hours ago, coughing, trembling, whispering words that still echoed in Ilara's head. "Don't move. Wait right here. I'll come back." Ilara squeezed the suitcase harder until her fingers ached. Inside it were the important things. A drawing folded too many times, a soft rabbit with one ear missing, her favorite dress clean just in case. The station thundered. Trains arrived. Doors hissed open, and still the little girl did not move. 2 police officers noticed her when the crowd thinned just enough for her silence to feel wrong. They approached slowly, careful, kneeling to make themselves smaller. Their voices were calm, practiced, the kind meant not to scare children. "Hey there," one of them said gently. "Are you lost?" Ilara didn't answer. Her blue eyes stayed locked on the clock above them. The second hand crept forward. Too slow. Always too slow. The other officer tried again. "Sweetheart, where's your mom?" That made her blink. Ilara finally looked down, not at them but at the suitcase. Her fingers tightened around the handle, the plastic creaking softly under the pressure. "She went to get help," Ilara whispered. Her voice was thin but steady, as if she had said those words many times already. As if repeating them kept something from breaking. The officers exchanged a glance. "And where do you live?" one asked. Ilara lifted her chin. Her jaw trembled for just a second before she locked it in place. "I'm not lost," she said quietly. "I live here." The words landed wrong, heavy, final. One officer frowned, unsure whether to smile or reach for his radio. "You live here in the station?" Ilara nodded once. Small, certain. "This is where she told me to wait," she added. "If I leave, she won't know where I am." A train thundered past behind them, wind whipping through the platform. Ilara flinched but did not step back. She dragged the red suitcase closer, pressing it against her knees like a shield. "I didn't do anything wrong," she said quickly, fear bleeding into her voice now. "I can be quiet. I promise." Her breathing started to hitch. People glanced over, curious for half a second, then turned away again. That was when a man in a charcoal coat slowed his steps. Julian Cross had walked through crowds his entire life without seeing them. Tonight, for reasons he couldn't explain, he stopped. Julian Cross had places to be, meetings waiting, calls unanswered, a driver outside growing impatient. He was used to momentum, used to moving forward and never looking back. But something in the girl's voice cut through the noise of the station like a blade. "I live here." Julian turned. He saw her then, really saw her. The wet shoes, the shaking hands, the way she stood as if the world might knock her over if she relaxed even a little. Without deciding to, Julian stepped closer. He ignored the officers, ignored the stares. He lowered himself slowly until his knees touched the cold stone floor, bringing his eyes level with the child's. He didn't speak at first. He just stayed. The station roared around them, but between Julian and the girl, something quiet settled. Ilara watched him closely, her gaze sharp and measuring as if she were weighing whether he was dangerous or simply temporary. Julian noticed the suitcase. Not new, not decorative. Used. Loved. Necessary. "What's your name?" he asked softly. For a moment, Ilara said nothing. Then, barely louder than the hum of the lights, she answered. "Ilara." The sound of it hit Julian harder than he expected. A name shouldn't feel like a responsibility, but suddenly it did. "I'm Julian," he said. "Can I stay here with you for a minute?" Ilara hesitated, then she nodded once. The officers shifted, unsure. Julian didn't look at them. His attention stayed with the small girl whose shoulders trembled beneath a red coat. "You're cold," he said gently. "I can't leave," Ilara replied immediately, panic flashing in her eyes. "If I'm not here, she won't find me." Julian took a slow breath. "Okay," he said. "Then I won't leave either." For the first time that night, Ilara's grip on the suitcase loosened just a little. The suitcase was heavier than it looked, not because of what was inside, but because of what it meant. Ilara kept it pressed against her legs, the cracked red shell cold even through her gloves. Julian noticed the way her arms trembled, not from weakness, but from effort, from holding on too long. "What's in there?" he asked gently, nodding toward the suitcase. Ilara's shoulders stiffened instantly. Her fingers curled tighter around the handle. "My things," she said. "Important things." Julian didn't push. He simply nodded, accepting the boundary as it was offered. The officers exchanged another look. One of them cleared his throat. "Sir, we'll need to follow procedure. She can't stay here overnight." The word procedure landed like a slap. Ilara reacted immediately. Her small body went rigid as if a wire had been pulled too tight. She shook her head, hard curls bouncing wildly. "No," she whispered. Then louder. "No. Please." She dragged the suitcase back until it hit the metal railing with a sharp clang that echoed too loudly across the platform. Heads turned. Someone stared. Someone else shook their head. "I didn't do anything wrong," Ilara cried, her words tumbling out fast, practiced, desperate. "I can stay here. I won't talk. I won't move. I promise." Tears spilled down her cheeks, hot against skin reddened by the cold. She pressed her face against the suitcase, clutching it to her chest, like it was alive. Julian stood, not abruptly, not aggressively, just enough. He positioned himself slightly in front of Ilara, between her and the officers, between her and the watching crowd. "Give us a moment," he said calmly. One officer hesitated. "Sir, please," Julian repeated. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The officers stepped back, uncertain. Julian crouched again, closer this time. "Ilara," he said softly, "I'm not here to take your suitcase, and no one is disappearing you tonight." She looked up at him through tears, eyes wide, searching his face for the lie she expected to find. "My mom said if I leave, she won't find me," Ilara whispered. Julian felt something tighten painfully in his chest. "Then we won't disappear," he said. "We'll make sure she can find you." Ilara's breathing slowed just a little. She didn't let go of the suitcase, but she stopped shaking. The station clock ticked loudly in the silence that followed. Ilara wiped her face with the sleeve of her coat, embarrassed now that the tears had come. She sniffed, then squared her shoulders again, standing straighter, braver than any 5-year-old should have to be. Julian stayed at her level. How long have you been waiting? He asked carefully. Ilara thought for a moment. She glanced up at the clock, then away. It was light when she left, she said. Then it wasn't. Julian didn't need more detail. She was sick, Ilara added, quieter now. She kept coughing. She said she just needed help. She said she'd be back before it got dark. Her voice cracked on the last word. Julian felt the shape of the truth forming cold and unmistakable. One of the officers shifted again. Sir, we really need to. Julian raised a hand without looking back. I understand, he said, but not like this. He turned fully to Ilara. Can I ask you something? She hesitated, then nodded. If we went somewhere warm, Julian said slowly, and if I promised that you wouldn't lose this place, that if your mom came back, she would know exactly where to find you, would that be okay? Ilara froze. Fear flashed across her face, sharp and bright. What if she comes when I'm gone? She whispered. Then I'll bring you back, Julian said immediately. Together. She studied him like a puzzle, searching for cracks. Her fingers flexed around the suitcase handle. You won't leave, she asked. Julian didn't answer right away. Then he nodded once. Firm. Certain. I'm staying. Something shifted in Ilara's eyes. Not trust. Not yet. But exhaustion. The officers approached again, slower this time. Papers appeared. Radios murmured. Words floated past Ilara's ears, temporary, safe overnight, none of them fully understood, all of them terrifying. Julian knelt in front of her once more. This means no one hurts you tonight, he said gently. You get warm food, a place to sleep, and your suitcase stays with you. Ilara looked down at the red case, then back up at him. You promise, she asked. Julian held her gaze. I promise to stay. She nodded once barely, and took one small step toward him. The cafe near the station smelled like bread and steam. Ilara stopped just inside the door, frozen again. Warm air rushed over her, unfamiliar and overwhelming. Her fingers tightened around the suitcase handle as if the heat itself might disappear if she trusted it too much. Julian didn't rush her. He guided her to a small table by the window and ordered a bowl of soup without asking. When it arrived, Ilara stared at it as if it were a trick. This is for me, she asked quietly. Julian nodded. No rush. She lifted the spoon carefully, hands shaking. The first taste made her pause. The second came faster. Soon the sound of the station faded, replaced by the soft clink of ceramic and her slow, steady breathing. Color crept back into her cheeks. Halfway through the bowl, Ilara looked up, serious again. You won't leave after this, she said. It wasn't a question. It was a condition. I'm not going anywhere tonight, Julian replied. She accepted the answer exactly as it was offered. When she finished eating, Ilara wrapped both arms around the warm bowl, eyelids drooping. Outside, snow pressed gently against the glass. For the first time in days, she wasn't guarding a place. She was sitting with a person. Julian watched her closely, feeling the weight of what he'd chosen settle deep in his chest. He had signed contracts worth billions without hesitation. None of them had felt like this. Ilara rested her chin on the edge of the table, still clutching the suitcase with one hand. If I sleep, she whispered, everything might change. Julian leaned back slightly, keeping his voice low. I'll be right here. She studied him one last time. Then slowly, she nodded. And for the first time since the station, Ilara let herself breathe. The hotel lobby glowed with soft yellow light. Too clean, too quiet. Ilara slowed her steps the moment they entered, her eyes darting as if the walls might move. Her small wheels bumped awkwardly behind her, the red suitcase refusing to roll straight. She kept close to Julian, not touching him, but never letting the distance stretch too far. When the elevator doors slid shut, Ilara stiffened. Is it going to stop? She asked quickly. Yes, Julian said gently. And then it'll go again. She nodded, unconvinced, clutching the suitcase tighter. The suite was larger than anything Ilara had ever seen. 2 rooms, 2 beds, too much space, too many places for things to disappear. She froze in the doorway, overwhelmed. Julian knelt immediately. "This room is yours," he said, pointing. "That one's mine. No locked doors, no surprises." Ilara didn't move. Only when Julian set the red suitcase beside the bed did she step inside, as if the case had tested the floor for her. She touched the hotel pajamas laid out neatly on the bed, rubbing the fabric between her fingers like it might dissolve. When the lights dimmed, Ilara sat stiffly on the edge of the mattress. "If I sleep," she whispered again, "everything might change." Julian pulled a chair close and sat down. "I'll stay right here," he said, "until morning." She studied him for a long time. Then she lay back slowly, one hand resting on the suitcase. Her breathing eased but never fully relaxed. Julian didn't sleep. He watched the rise and fall of her chest, the way her fingers curled instinctively around the handle, even in rest. Outside, the city hummed. Inside, something fragile held. Long after the lights of the city softened into quiet, Julian remained in the chair, guarding a child who had learned too early that sleep could cost you everything. Julian waited until Ilara's breathing deepened. Only then did he stand. He moved into the adjoining room and closed the door gently, as if even sound might break what little peace she had found. The phone felt heavy in his hand as he dialed. The call was brief, precise. Hospitals, emergency rooms, unidentified admissions, anything in the last week. No assumptions, no shortcuts. Julian stared out the window as he waited, the city lights blurred by frost on the glass. Minutes stretched. Then the phone vibrated. His assistant's voice was quieter now, more careful. There was a woman, admitted 3 nights ago, collapsed near a bus stop. No identification, severe dehydration, untreated infection. The location sat only blocks from the station. Julian closed his eyes. Relief and dread collided in his chest. If this woman was Ilara's mother, she was alive. But she had been alone. Julian returned to the bedroom. Ilara hadn't moved. Her curls fanned across the pillow. She looked younger now, smaller, fragile in a way she had never allowed herself to be while awake. How many nights had she stayed alert, afraid that sleeping meant losing everything? Julian sat back down in the chair. He didn't touch her. He didn't wake her. "I'm here," he whispered anyway. Ilara stirred, murmuring something unintelligible, then settled again. Julian looked at the clock. Morning was still hours away, but the path ahead was already clear. Morning arrived pale and cold. Ilara was already dressed when Julian woke, sitting on the edge of the bed with the red suitcase positioned carefully at her feet. She hadn't asked why they were leaving so early. She only looked at him, eyes wide and searching. In the car, she hugged the suitcase to her chest, watching buildings slide past the window. Each stoplight felt too long. Each turn tightened the knot in her shoulders. "Are we going back to the station?" she asked softly. "No," Julian said. "We're going to see someone." She nodded, but her grip tightened. When the hospital came into view, Ilara's breathing changed. Shallow, fast. "If my mom's mad?" She began, then stopped. Julian parked and turned to face her fully. "Whatever happens," he said, "you won't face it alone." She swallowed hard and reached for the door handle. Then she froze and looked back at him. "You're coming too," she said. It wasn't a question. Julian nodded without hesitation. The hospital corridor smelled like antiseptic and quiet fear. Ilara's steps slowed with every foot they drew closer to the room. The suitcase bumped softly against her knee. At the door, she stopped completely. "What if she doesn't know me?" Ilara whispered. Julian knelt beside her, not blocking her view. "Then I'll be here," he said simply. Ilara pressed her forehead lightly against the door, her eyes closed. "I waited," she whispered. Then, with a small, shaking hand, she turned the handle. The door opened. The hospital room was washed in pale light. Machines hummed softly, indifferent and steady. A woman lay on the narrow bed, thinner than memory, her skin drawn tight chest, rising unevenly beneath thin sheets. Ilara stepped inside as if the floor might disappear. One step, then another. Her eyes moved everywhere at once, the wires, the beeping monitor, the IV drip. Everything felt too loud, too fragile. She climbed onto the chair beside the bed, movements slow and deliberate, afraid that moving too fast might wake something terrible. For a long moment, she didn't touch her. Then Ilara lifted her hand. Her fingers trembled as they brushed the woman's arm. The woman stirred. Eyelids fluttered. A breath caught in her chest. "Mommy," Ilara whispered. The sound was barely there, fragile as breath on glass. The woman's fingers twitched weakly, searching. When they closed around Ilara's small hand, something inside the child finally broke open. Ilara leaned forward, pressing her forehead against the bed, her shoulders shaking as weeks of fear spilled out all at once. No screaming, no words. Just relief finally allowed to exist. Julian stayed near the door, giving space ready if the moment shattered. Ilara didn't let go. Even when the woman's grip weakened, even when the machines hummed louder than her breath, Ilara held on, as if loosening her fingers might make everything disappear again. Tears slid silently down her cheeks, dripping onto the white sheet. She wiped them away with the back of her sleeve, determined not to miss a single second. The woman's lips moved without sound. Ilara leaned closer. "I waited," she whispered. "Just like you said." The woman's fingers squeezed faintly. It was enough. For the first time since the station, Ilara felt the ground beneath her feet stop shifting. Ilara finally looked over her shoulder. Julian stood a few steps away, frozen. He hadn't realized until that moment that the room had quietly rearranged itself around him, that he was no longer a stranger at the edge. He was part of the frame. "Can you fix her?" Ilara asked. The question wasn't dramatic. It wasn't desperate. It was simple, absolute. She climbed down from the chair, still holding her mother's hand, until the last possible inch of reach, then walked straight toward Julian. Her eyes lifted to his, clear and trusting in a way that felt unbearable. "They listen to you," she said, nodding toward the hallway, toward the doctors, toward the world of adults and authority. "You can make them help her." Julian felt something collapse and rebuild inside his chest at the same time. He knelt so they were eye level. "I can't promise how fast," he said carefully. "And I can't promise it will be easy." Ilara didn't flinch, "But I promise I won't stop," he finished. She studied his face, searching for weakness, for doubt. She found none. Ilara nodded once, slow and solemn, as if sealing a contract far heavier than any Julian had ever signed. Behind her, the woman on the bed exhaled a shaky breath. The doctor spoke carefully, each word measured. Severe dehydration, untreated infection, weeks of exhaustion layered on a weakened body. Recovery would be slow, uncertain, expensive. The word expensive filled the silence without being spoken. Ilara didn't understand the terms. She only watched Julian's face. Julian didn't hesitate. Do everything he said. No delays. The doctor blinked, startled, then nodded and stepped out to make arrangements. Ilara slid her small hand into Julian's without asking. He held it. Sienna woke later, confused and frightened. Her eyes flicked from the machines to Ilara, then to Julian. When recognition settled, tears escaped, despite her effort to stop them. "I'm sorry," she whispered hoarsely. "I didn't mean to leave you." Ilara shook her head fiercely. "You're here," she said. "That's all." When the doctor mentioned insurance gaps, long-term care, Sienna's face tightened with shame. She whispered that she didn't have money, that she had already failed her daughter once. Julian stepped forward before Ilara could hear more. "Send me the bill," he said calmly. The room froze. "This isn't charity," Julian added evenly. "It's care." He explained what Alara had endured. The nights, the station, the waiting. He told the doctor to proceed with everything necessary, private room specialists, no shortcuts. Sienna closed her eyes, tears slipping free. "Thank you," she whispered. Julian didn't answer. He squeezed Alara's hand instead. Outside the room, Julian's phone buzzed. The board. Questions sharpened by concern disguised as strategy. "This is a distraction," one voice warned. Julian looked through the glass at Alara sitting beside her mother, humming softly. "I'm not leaving," he said. The call ended. Later, as the doctors worked, Alara leaned against him, suddenly heavy with exhaustion. "You stayed," she murmured. Julian looked down at her. "Yes," he said quietly, "I did." For the first time, Alara set the red suitcase down beside the chair and forgot about it. And Julian understood this wasn't a pause in his life. It was a choice. The days that followed blurred into a quiet rhythm Julian had never known. Mornings began in the hospital before the city fully woke. The halls were softer, then voices, low lights dimmed like the building itself was trying not to disturb the fragile hope growing inside room 714. Alara sat beside her mother's bed every morning, coloring carefully on a clipboard the nurses had given her. She paused every few minutes, eyes lifting, to check that Sienna was still breathing steadily. Only then would she return to her crayons. Julian watched from a chair near the wall. He took calls there, acquisitions, deadlines, legal fires that once would have consumed his entire world. He extinguished them all with calm precision, then slipped the phone back into his pocket and turned his attention to the small girl humming softly beside the bed. Sienna improved slowly. Color returned to her cheeks. Her eyes stayed open longer. When she spoke, it was often to apologize, to worry aloud about money, about burdening a man she barely knew. Julian cut those thoughts short each time. "Rest," he told her. "That's your only job." Alara changed in quieter ways. She still brought the red suitcase everywhere, but she no longer hugged it constantly. Sometimes she set it down beside the chair and forgot about it altogether. Once she laughed soft and surprised when Julian miscolored a drawing she was teaching him to finish. The sound stopped him cold. It felt like proof, like progress measured in something that couldn't be charted. But the calls from the board grew sharper. They asked about optics, about perception, about why the CEO was missing meetings. They spoke of risk in the careful language of people who believed control was the same thing as safety. Julian listened without interrupting. One afternoon, he stood by the window phone pressed to his ear, watching Alara read aloud to her mother. She stumbled over long words, frowned, tried again. Sienna smiled weakly, eyes closed, listening like it was the most important story in the world. "This can't continue," a voice on the phone said. "You're needed." Julian watched Alara turn a page, careful not to crease it. "I'm right where I need to be," he replied. The silence on the other end was heavier than anger. When he returned to the room, Alara looked up immediately. She always did now, as if tracking his presence by instinct. "You came back," she said. Julian nodded. She went back to reading. The confrontation came quietly. A call just after dusk, when the hospital lights softened and the city outside the window began to glow. Julian stepped into the hallway, his reflection stretched thin along the glass. The board's voices were polite, concerned, sharpened by strategy. They spoke of exposure, of leadership distracted by sentiment. They reminded him that companies survived on decisiveness, not detours. Julian said nothing. He watched through the window as Alara climbed onto the chair beside her mother, leaning carefully against the bed. She traced shapes on the fogged glass with one finger, then rested her head near Sienna's shoulder. "She needs systems," one voice continued. "Not you." Julian felt the old reflex stir, the instinct to comply, to optimize, to choose the move that preserved power. For years, that instinct had never failed him. He ended the call with a single sentence. I'm not leaving. Warnings followed. Consequences, votes, risk. Julian thanked them for their concern and hung up. His hand trembled only after the screen went dark. When he returned to the room, Ilara looked up. Did you fix it? She asked, hopeful and certain in the same breath. Julian smiled, small but real. Yes. She nodded, satisfied, and turned back to her book. A moment later, she reached out and took his hand. Her fingers were warm, unafraid. Julian sat beside her, understanding the trade clearly now. Power could be rebuilt, influence renegotiated. This quiet reliance could not. That night, as Sienna slept peacefully, and Ilara traced slow circles on the window fog, Julian understood the truth settling into his bones. This wasn't a pause in his life. It was a redirection. The word discharge arrived quietly, wrapped in clinical calm. A social worker explained recovery plans, follow-ups, medication schedules, then paused at the obvious gap: stable housing. The room went still. Sienna's face tightened with the old reflex of refusal. She said they would manage somehow, that they always had. Ilara's hand drifted back to the red suitcase without her noticing. Julian waited until the silence settled. Arrangements are already made, he said evenly. He described a furnished apartment near the hospital. Light, heat, groceries stocked, home care scheduled. He spoke as if listing facts, not gifts. Sienna shook her head, breath hitching. I can't accept charity from a stranger. This isn't charity, Julian replied. It's stability. He explained that recovery required rest without fear. No counting pennies, no moving targets. Ilara deserved a place that wouldn't vanish overnight. Ilara looked between them, confused and hopeful. We won't have to go back, she asked softly. Julian met her gaze. Never. She nodded once, then leaned against him, small and certain. The apartment smelled new, clean wood, warm air, something steady that didn't echo. Ilara stepped inside, slowly testing each step like the floor might disappear. She set the red suitcase down by the door and forgot it there. Distracted by the soft couch, the lamp glowing like a promise, the bedroom with a bed made just for her. She touched the blanket. It stayed. That night, Ilara brushed her teeth and paused at the sink, staring at her reflection. Are you coming back tomorrow? She asked, casual but careful. Julian crouched beside her. I'll be here in the morning, he said. And the next? She considered this. Then she wrapped her arms around him, sudden and fierce. Julian returned the hug without hesitation. When Ilara fell asleep, the suitcase rested by her bed, not in her arms. Julian stood in the doorway, watching fear loosen its grip on the room. Outside, the city moved on. Inside, something permanent began. The first week in the apartment should have felt like an ending. Warmth, clean sheets, a refrigerator stocked with food Ilara didn't have to beg for. A couch that didn't smell like yesterday's worry. A bedroom where a nightlight glowed softly like a promise someone meant to keep. But Julian had lived long enough to know endings rarely arrived quietly. They arrived with paperwork, with phones that wouldn't stop buzzing, with strangers who smiled too easily. It began with a knock at the door. Julian opened it to find two people he didn't recognize. One wore a neutral blazer and carried a leather folder. The other held a tablet and a smile that looked practiced. Mr. Cross, the woman said. I'm with your legal team. This is a welfare liaison assigned to the case. We need to confirm details regarding the minor. Ilara's head popped up from the rug where she was arranging toy blocks in careful, symmetrical lines. Her eyes snapped to the strangers. Her small body went still in the same way it had in the station, frozen, watchful, ready to disappear into silence. Her hand drifted toward the red suitcase by the bed. Julian noticed. He stepped into the doorway, leaving the visitors outside. You can talk to me, he said, voice calm. Not in front of her. The liaison's smile tightened. It's standard. We just need to make sure the child is safe and not being relocated improperly. The word relocated struck Alara like a spark to dry paper. Julian closed the door gently, locking it without looking dramatic. Then he turned to Alara. She was staring at him with wide, alert eyes, breath held. "They're taking me," she whispered. "No," Julian said immediately. Her voice trembled anyway. "But they have papers." Julian crossed the room slowly and knelt in front of her, keeping his hands visible, his posture low. "Alara," he said softly, "papers don't get to decide everything." Her eyes flicked toward the door. They said procedure. Julian felt the word cut through him because it had cut through her first. "No one's moving you today," he said. "Not without me. Not without your mom. Not ever like that." Alara swallowed hard. Her fingers curled into her pajama sleeve. "Promise," Julian held her gaze. "I promise." A second knock came harder this time. Julian stood, walked back to the door, and opened it just enough to speak. He kept his body angled, a barrier between the visitors and the living room where Alara sat. The legal rep lowered his voice. "Sir, this is turning into a situation. The board is concerned. Media picked up chatter about you taking custody of a sick woman's child. There are optics." Julian didn't blink. "Optics don't keep a child warm. She's not legally yours," the man continued, as if Julian didn't understand English. "A temporary signature doesn't erase protocol. We need to formalize, or step away." Julian looked down at the folder in the man's hands and felt a familiar anger rise, cold, controlled, clean. All his life he had watched people treat human lives like numbers. He had signed those numbers himself. Not this time. "She has a mother," Julian said, "and her mother is recovering. That's the only reality that matters." The liaison leaned forward. "We can place the child in a qualified foster environment until the mother is stable." Behind Julian, a small sound, barely a breath. Alara had stood up. Julian turned. She wasn't crying. She was holding the red suitcase in both hands like a shield, knuckles white. "If I go," she said quietly, voice trembling but stubborn, "my mom won't find me." The words sliced the room open. The visitors paused. The legal rep looked uncomfortable, as if a child's voice had ruined the neat script. Julian walked back to Alara and gently took the suitcase handle, not to take it, but to steady it. He lowered his voice so only she could hear. "Your mom knows where you are now," he said, "and I'm right here." Ilara's breathing hitched. Julian turned back to the door. His voice sharpened, not loud, just final. "Tell the board," he said, "if they want my seat, they can have it." The legal rep blinked. Sir Julian didn't flinch. "But they don't get this child." He closed the door. And for the first time since he'd built an empire, Julian Cross felt power slip out of his hands and land somewhere it actually belonged. In a small apartment. In a little girl's trembling breath. In the promise of staying. 2 nights later, the city found them. Not with sirens or flashing lights, those would have been easy. It found them through a camera lens. Julian stepped out of the elevator in the lobby of the apartment building and froze. A man stood near the front desk, leaning casually against a marble pillar. Expensive coat. Too confident. Eyes that flicked toward Julian with recognition, like this was a planned encounter. Julian's security instincts snapped awake. The man smiled. "Mr. Cross?" he said warmly, like they were old friends. "Just wanted to see if the rumors were true." Julian didn't respond. He simply walked past. The man followed, slow, measured, keeping enough distance to look harmless. "People are saying you've got a little girl living with you," he continued. "A CEO playing father. That's a story, sir." Julian stopped near the mailboxes and turned. "Who are you?" he asked. The man lifted a card, a small logo. A media outlet Julian didn't respect. "Grant Leland," he said. "Freelance." Julian's jaw tightened. "Leave." Grant's smile didn't fade. Not here to cause trouble, he said. Just curious. Because the board is curious. Investors are curious. And honestly, the public loves a redemption arc. Julian stepped closer. Leave. Grant raised both hands as if amused. Sure. But you should know someone already leaked the hospital name. Your little stability plan. It's out there. Julian's blood cooled. He turned and walked fast, keys in hand. When he entered the apartment, Ilara looked up immediately from the couch where she was watching cartoons with the sound low. You're walking loud, she observed, small and serious. Julian tried to soften his face. Just a long day. Sienna sat nearby, blanket around her shoulders, still pale but stronger than before. She looked at Julian and knew instantly something was wrong. What happened? She asked. Julian didn't lie. He hated lying. There's a tension, he said. The kind we don't want. Sienna's face drained. Because of me. Because people are cruel when they smell vulnerability, Julian replied. Not because of you. A knock came at the door. Not loud. Not polite either. The kind of knock that expected obedience. Ilara stiffened. The cartoon voice continued in the background, cheerful and wrong, while fear thickened in the room. Julian moved to the door and looked through the peephole. 2 men, 1 woman. A camera just visible at the edge, trying to pretend it wasn't there. Julian's stomach dropped. He opened the door just enough to speak. Mr. Cross, the woman asked, voice syrupy. We're from Child Services. We received an urgent report. Ilara slid off the couch silently and moved behind Julian, clutching the red suitcase. Her small hands shook. Julian kept his voice calm. What report? The woman glanced at her clipboard. Possible exploitation of a minor. We need to verify the child's living situation. Sienna stood, wobbling, her face white. This is my daughter, she said, voice rough but fierce. She's safe. The woman's smile didn't reach her eyes. Ma'am, we can discuss custody arrangements once we verify. Ilara suddenly spoke. Her voice was small, but it cut through the room like glass. I live here, she said. The worker blinked. Honey. Ilara stepped forward, trembling, hugging the suitcase to her chest. I waited in the station, she continued, eyes shining. I didn't move. I did what my mom said. And he stayed. Her lip trembled. He didn't leave. The room went silent. Even the cartoon seemed to pause, as if the world itself had turned its head. Julian looked down at Ilara and felt a violent swell of emotion, pride, grief, rage, all at once. The worker tried to recover. Sweetie, we just need to make sure you're safe. Ilara's gaze hardened in a way that didn't belong to 5-year-old eyes. I am safe, she said. Because he stays. Julian turned back to the worker. His voice dropped into the tone he used when ending negotiations. You will not interrogate her, he said. If you have questions, you ask me. If you have legal concerns, you talk to my counsel. And if you have 1 ounce of decency, you will stop making a traumatized child relive the worst week of her life for your paperwork. The worker's cheeks flushed. She opened her mouth. Julian continued, unbroken. This home is stable. This mother is recovering. This child is safe. He held her gaze. Now leave. The door closed. The lock clicked. And Ilara exhaled a shaky breath she'd been holding since the train station. Julian knelt beside her and spoke softly. You were brave. Ilara didn't smile. She simply asked the only question that mattered. You're still here. Right, Julian's throat tightened. He nodded. I'm still here. That night, Sienna couldn't sleep. Julian found her sitting at the kitchen table, staring into a mug of tea she hadn't touched. The apartment was quiet. Ilara had finally fallen asleep, the suitcase resting beside her bed like a retired soldier. Sienna didn't look up when Julian entered. They'll keep coming, she whispered. Julian pulled out the chair across from her and sat. They might, he admitted. Sienna's hands shook. "I don't want my daughter to be a headline," she said. "I don't want her to be a story people pass around for entertainment." Julian leaned forward, voice low. "Then we take control of the story." Sienna finally met his eyes, fear and gratitude tangled together. How Julian inhaled slowly. All his life, control had meant distance. It had meant walls high enough that nothing could reach him. It had meant never letting anyone close enough to hurt him. But Alara had already reached him. Not with need, with trust. "I'm going to step down," Julian said quietly. Sienna blinked. From the CEO role, Julian finished. "Not forever, but long enough. The board thinks staying makes me weak. Let them. I'm done bargaining with people who measure humanity in quarterly reports." Sienna's eyes filled with tears. "You don't have to ruin your life for us." Julian's voice softened. "This isn't ruin," he said. "This is the first decision I've made in years that feels like truth." Sienna covered her mouth, crying silently. Julian stood and walked to the hallway. Ilara's bedroom door was slightly open. A nightlight spilled warm gold onto the floor like a path. Julian stepped inside. Ilara slept on her side, curls spread across the pillow. Her face was relaxed now, still guarded in some deep place, but not clenched in fear. The red suitcase sat near the bed, closed quiet, no longer clutched like a lifeline. Julian watched her chest rise and fall. He remembered the station, the roaring noise, the child who didn't move, the words that had shattered him. "I live here." He realized then what here had really meant. Not the station, not the bench, not the clock. Here meant where someone stays. Julian crouched beside the bed, careful not to wake her. He didn't touch her, not yet. He simply let his presence fill the space the way it had that first night. Ilara stirred slightly, eyes fluttering open. For a second, panic flashed in her gaze, fast as lightning. Then she saw Julian. She blinked, confused, then whispered, "Is it morning? Not yet," Julian said softly. Ilara's fingers reached toward the edge of the blanket. "You're here," she murmured, more statement than question. Julian nodded. Ilara's eyelids drooped again, but she fought sleep like it was an enemy. "If I sleep," she whispered, "don't leave." Julian's throat tightened. "I won't," he said. "Not tonight. Not tomorrow." Ilara searched his face in the dim light as if checking the shape of the promise. Then slowly she nodded. And she did something that nearly broke him. She reached out, touched his sleeve with two small fingers, gentle, careful, like she was testing whether he was real. Julian stayed completely still. Ilara's hand relaxed. Her fingers slipped away. Her breathing deepened. She fell asleep again. Julian remained there a long time after. Not because he was guarding her from the world, but because he was finally learning what it meant to belong to someone. In the kitchen later, Julian sent one message to his assistant: cancel everything. Schedule the vote. I'll speak first. He stared at the phone screen. Power had always been about leaving. Tonight, power meant staying, and Julian Cross had accepted the cost without resentment. Because the first thing Ilara had ever asked him to do was the one thing he'd never been good at. Stay. The boardroom had never felt smaller. Glass walls, city skyline, faces Julian had known for years, measured, controlled, unreadable. This room had decided the fate of thousands of people, entire industries, without ever raising its voice. Julian stood at the head of the table. He didn't bring slides. He didn't bring numbers. He brought the truth. "I'm stepping back," he said calmly. Murmurs rippled through the room. Someone leaned forward. Someone else frowned, already calculating the damage. "This is temporary," Julian continued, "but necessary." A voice cut in. "Because of the child," Julian nodded. "Because of a child. And because of what she taught me." They pressed him. Fiduciary duty, public image, stability. He listened, then ended the debate with the same quiet certainty he had used in the station. "You can replace a CEO," he said. "You can't replace a childhood." Silence followed, thick, uncomfortable. When the vote was called, Julian didn't wait for the result. He already knew the cost. He stood, thanked them for their time, and walked out. Outside, the city felt different, louder, colder, but his phone buzzed. A message from his assistant: vote passed. Interim appointed. Julian exhaled. At the apartment, Ilara sat on the floor, coloring tongue tucked between her teeth in concentration. She looked up the second the door opened. "You're back early," she said. Julian smiled. "I told you I'd come back." She studied his face, searching for something only she could see. Then she nodded and went back to coloring, satisfied. Sienna watched from the kitchen doorway, tears gathering silently. "You didn't have to do that," she whispered. Julian shook his head. "I needed to." That night, for the first time since the station, the world didn't feel like it was waiting to take something away. Recovery took time. Weeks passed. Sienna grew stronger. Ilara grew lighter. The suitcase stayed by the bed now, untouched, its job finished. One evening, as the sun bled orange across the apartment walls, Ilara sat beside Julian on the couch, legs tucked beneath her. "Can I ask you something?" she said. Julian nodded. "Always." She hesitated, fingers worrying the edge of the cushion. "When my mom gets better, where will you go?" The question landed softly, but it hit hard. Julian didn't answer right away. "I don't know," he said honestly. Ilara absorbed this. Her face fell, not dramatically, not with tears, just a quiet closing, like a door someone forgot to hold open. Sienna watched from across the room, heartbreaking. Julian saw it. He knelt in front of Ilara, bringing his eyes level with hers. "But I do know this," he said gently. "I'm not disappearing." Ilara's voice was small. "People say that," Julian nodded. "I know." He took a breath. "So I won't say it. I'll show you." That night, Julian stayed again. And the next. And the next. Mornings came with breakfast together. Evenings with stories. No announcements. No grand gestures. Just presence, consistent and real. One afternoon, Ilara handed Julian a drawing. It showed 3 figures, one small, one taller, one in between. Underneath, in careful, uneven letters, she had written, "Here." Julian swallowed hard. Winter loosened its grip on the city. Snow melted. Days grew longer. One morning, Ilara woke up and didn't check the door. She padded into the kitchen, hair messy, eyes sleepy, and climbed into a chair like it had always been hers. The red suitcase stayed in the bedroom, forgotten. Julian watched her from the doorway. Sienna caught his eye and smiled, soft, grateful, real. Ilara looked up from her cereal. "You're still here," she said. Julian nodded. "I am." She accepted this without celebration, without fear, because it was normal now. Later, as the city moved outside and life found a new rhythm, Julian understood what the station had taught him that night. Belonging wasn't a destination. It wasn't a rescue. It wasn't even a promise. It was a decision made every day. And for the first time in his life, Julian Cross didn't feel the urge to leave. He had chosen to stay. And that choice changed everything. Did this story move your soul? Share your feelings in the comments and rate it from 1 to 10. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Then tap the bell icon so you never miss a new story. Click the end screen to watch another heartfelt video. See you in the next story.